Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about disability and the ability to brush disability under the carpet, shun it. You know, people who are at work with disabilities, afraid of their losing their jobs or being discriminated against simply because they've got a disability, and yet we brush it under the carpet. Yet it's something that's still a bit taboo. People still don't want to accept the fact that they, you know, their work counterpart or that the other person in their classroom has a disability, but they're able to do what you do. And so for me, disability is always one of those things that needs to come to the forefront of every conversation, because as we go on in life, there's more and more disabilities every day. I mean, I'm talking about children who have ADHD, even epilepsy, even autism. These children are going under the radar, and they're calling it things like challenging behaviour in schools because they don't understand what's going on with the children. So I'm going to talk to you about, I ask you a few questions because you know a little bit more than me about it. I mean, I've worked with children who have been diagnosed with these symptoms, and all along people didn't know they were autistic.
Okay.
And they were excluded and all sorts of things. So in terms of autism, because I know you work a lot with autistic children and you have autistic children.
Okay.
What kind of an impact does that have on your life?
I would say the impact it's had on my life is that it's changed me in a great deal of who to trust with my children. Because in the beginning, when they were younger, everybody wants to see a baby.
Yeah.
But as time goes on and their behaviour becomes questionable, is why they act the way they do. So if they're not talking, like my son, he didn't start talking till he was about 5, 6.
Okay.
But then when people got the old mother wives tales, oh, that's how boys are.
Not talking till he was 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would find that because he couldn't talk, I found it very difficult to get the help I wanted to. But most of the time, I think it was from him. Had a lot of body contact. So he used to touch you quite a lot.
Yeah.
But the touch could be very seen as aggressive.
Yeah.
To the point when he started pushing, biting, slapping, it was that there was something obviously going on at home.
Okay. All right. So it wasn't looked at like a disability. It was more like a behaviour.
Before it was more about what is happening in the household.
Yeah.
And then because there was domestic abuse, they assumed it was what my son was seeing or what he was watching on television. And once he got the diagnosis, it didn't make no difference because people didn't believe he was autistic. Just felt it was challenging behaviour because of single black mother.
Okay. Did it have an effect? Tell me about his school, your son's school. How was he coping at school?
My son never really coped at school. I think he was just there. He was just a child that was seen to clown around. And because he was non-verbal, most of his early years in nursery and school, was it reception 1?
Reception 1, yeah.
They just thought that he was just slow delay. He needed one-to-one support. But because of the fact he was non-verbal, he couldn't really say a lot. I would say it's very challenging because every time I pick him up, they always had something bad to say.
As they do. If you don't understand something, you've always got something bad to say about it.
Yeah, it was never nothing positive. So when I went to school, it was like, oh, here we go again. To the point, I started questioning myself because my first child, she was okay.
Yeah.
But with him, it was just nothing was good. No one ever had nothing good to say about him, to the point I started to close up. I didn't want to talk to nobody. So I would say I became more of a moaner.
Yeah.
Or everybody thought, well, what's wrong with her? She's got everything she wants. But it wasn't so much that. It was, I just felt that I couldn't get nowhere with him. When I went to school, they complained. Parents found it difficult that they didn't want to invite to school parties. So you notice where at the beginning he had lots of friends. And then as time went on, as he got older, you noticed that the friends list got less. But I wouldn't question it. I just thought, okay, that's how it is. But once he got the diagnosis of autism ADHD by chance, by accident, that's where I saw a different ball game with how people perceived the diagnosis and said there was nothing wrong with him.
Yeah. So you say by accident he was diagnosed?
He got excluded when he was in an independent school because when I worked in television or at the time, and then obviously I decided to go into a part-time job, I didn't see a lot of his milestones. So I would not have noticed anything different about him. But it was the complaints that at school that he jumped on the girl's back and he got excluded. So could I come and get him?
Yeah.
So he was excluded. And then from there on, I remember I called the hospital and said, look, I really want him to get assessed for the behaviour because they thought that he had ADHD. But when he did get the diagnosis, they said it wasn't ADHD, it was autism.
So it was by chance.
It was by chance because I was told it was going to be a 1 year wait. I got somebody actually didn't go for their appointment that day, that week, and I said, you can come in. And then when I got in, they said, it's not ADHD, it's autism, with and autism.
So when you found out it was autism, did that give you a greater sense of what was happening with his behaviour?
I think when people always ask me that same question, when I look back, I think it was a great relief because I knew that it wasn't ADHD I was looking at, it was the fact autism. With ADHD, you heard so much about people labelling black boys. So I didn't sort of like, oh, here we go again, they're labelling my child. It was no matter how many parenting workshops I was told to go on, his behaviour wasn't changing. He was the child that no eye contact, you touch him, he was all over the place like a canary. You know, you let him out of a cage, he was all over the place. So putting those strategies in didn't work. But I think once I got the diagnosis and I got in contact with the National Autism Society and I tried to connect with other families, I felt I had more help from the National Autism Society and the ADHD specialists than I did from people who claimed that they worked with children with special needs.
So it is like this void that's there, isn't there?
Yeah.
We're going to touch more on this topic because this is just it's such a massive topic because every time you go into a school, this title, challenging behaviour, I think is too broad. I think they need to look into it more specifically and find out if that child has special needs, if that child has alternative needs to the other pupils who are normal. And so we will be covering a lot more about autism and disability in young people and adults, because I feel that there's still adults walking around now who haven't come to terms with the fact that they have or they may have a disability. And that might reflect itself in their relationships.
I think what I've picked up on over the years is that I've actually met a lot of young people who've been late diagnosed, but then for them it's easy for them to speak because they can speak for themselves. But when you find there's a lot of mature men who said, I've been diagnosed with autism, but I've struggled in relationships because of my parents didn't want me to accept a diagnosis when I was younger. That's the problem I have, because they had a lot of years of they could have got the support, but if they're not being given the support, you find that most of the time these young men or even mature men or women, they're put down the mental health path. So they may give them medication that is not to do with and
it's for mental health
it's
issues.
For mental health. Mental health is very different, or mental illness is very different to autism, ADHD, because they need that support. And if they don't get that support in later life, then they will end up having a mental illness. Because, like with my son, they were always told that they thought he had bipolar or schizophrenia because of the mood swings. It wasn't. It was because when somebody touched him, or the place was loud, or people said, give me eye contact, and you touched him, then he would lash out.
It was the autism.
But now he's older, he can explain himself. But imagine that you've got a lot of these young men in prison who have not been given a diagnosis or have been given a diagnosis, but if the diagnosis has not been implemented in their plan in the prison system, nobody's going to know. So if I understand about autism, but if I'm with somebody who doesn't understand, how can we connect if you don't understand the condition? I wouldn't put a blind child with somebody who has no clue how to work with that blind child unless you've got that training. So autism is the same because it's a way of the person's thinking. But if you can't see the brain, you don't know what's going on in their head. But I've learned that only because I've learned to speak with a lot of older adults who've said, just because I'm an adult doesn't mean I don't feel the same things as somebody as a child. But a lot of the services are all geared to the children. And it's not geared to the adults.
To the adults. The adults are somewhat forgotten about.
So we have to look at services that would meet the needs of adults. Or if you are a woman or a man who are married to somebody who's autistic, don't assume just because they cope, because they've still got challenges that need to be resolved. And that word challenge in something is used loosely because anybody can be challenged to do something, but they can have an end result. But if they don't have no strategies put in place, they can always go round and round in a circle.
So, as usual, comments below. If you think you may be on the spectrum, isn't it, they call it, or you think that you may know somebody, or you work in a school and somebody there has challenging behaviour, maybe you want to look a bit further into it and see whether or not there is a diagnosis that needs to be made. And what was interesting that you said, and I'll leave on this point, is that the prison services are filled with young people who could possibly be on that spectrum.
Even the pupil referral units.
Even the pupil referral units. So I'll leave you there, leave comments, share if you like, but get this to a person that may know somebody that needs it.